item is on many newspapers today, on their front pages, and it's the worry in financial circles about how to deal with the grey listing of Pakistan by the Financial Action Task Force, which is based in Paris. Now, for quite a while, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had denied that Pakistan was going to be placed upon this grey list, but now it has officially confirmed that from the 1st of June this year, Pakistan will be on this grey list for a period of 3 months, and if a satisfactory response, if the response of Pakistan is judged to be unsatisfactory, then it may well be placed upon the blacklist. Now, the Financial Action, the FATF is basically empowered to look at terror financing, and it has a series of quite serious strictures, regulations, and because Pakistan has been under the microscope, this was at the insistence of India and the United States. It was resisted to an extent by China and Turkey, which are Pakistan's allies, but in spite of that, it is now official. Well, the Foreign Office says there's no chance of Pakistan being blacklisted, but nevertheless, financial institutes in Pakistan are very worried because this is going to drive up the cost of business. Now, this is not an issue which, unfortunately, the government can do very much about. This is an issue which will ultimately be resolved by what attitude the Pakistan army takes. However, the reaction from the ISPR, which is the Inter-Services Public Relations, has been that it is not really a matter for the army, but rather for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and for the Ministry of Economic Affairs. Nevertheless, you can see that there is a degree of worry because as early as February, you had the President of Pakistan and the Internal Minister, the Minister of the Interior, come up with new regulations, and today we see the effect of those new regulations. We are told that formally the charities which are run by the Jamaat-ud-Dawa and the Falah-e-Insaniyat Foundation, these are two institutions that are associated with the Lashkar-e-Taiba. The Lashkar-e-Taiba is the organization which carried out the attacks on Mumbai in 2008. Well, we are told that those assets have been seized. Question is what to make of this. Does this reflect a change of heart or a change of tactics? We need only recall that General Musharraf had banned the Lashkar-e-Taiba, LET for short, way back with his speech, a very famous speech on the 12th of January 2002, where he said that terrorist groups have no place on Pakistani soil. He seems to have had some change of heart, because in November last year, 2017, he declared them excellent institutions of Pakistan. So we don't really know whether there's been a change of heart, but certainly the message from Paris has gotten to Rawalpindi. If it gets to Islamabad, is not very significant, because the heart of power lies in Rawalpindi. Well, why did the army choose to respond? There's no doubt that it has responded. There are, I believe, two reasons why the army did respond, and did respond in a positive way. One is that the Pakistan army has huge financial interests in the national economy, and nobody can tell you better than Aisha Siddiqa over here. It has investments in every part of the Pakistani economy, in the making of sugar, of cement, in airlines, in shipping, in beauty parlors, whatever. There's a second reason that the army is, so the reason that the grey listing has had an effect, and that the blacklisting would have an even greater effect, is that these financial interests would be hurt. There's a second reason why the Pakistan Army is not totally dedicated to nurturing militant organizations upon its soil, because it has lost a lot of people. A lot of soldiers, a lot of officers, in fact, more soldiers and officers than in all the wars against India. Now that's quite a stunning fact. So these two reasons make the army move in a direction so as to curb the power of militant groups operating on Pakistani soil. But then there is also reason for inaction, because although thousands of Pakistani soldiers have been killed, yet that was in the past, and in the last 3 years that rate has come down substantially. It's not gone to zero, but it is perhaps a tenth of what it was earlier. This is because of the success of anti-terrorist operations, Zarb-e-Azb, Radul Fasad, and these involved big civilian casualties, they involved the use of air power, but as a consequence of that, there is a considerable degree of confidence that militant groups that are against the Pakistan Army can be successfully controlled. Then, although the United States has been waving its club at Pakistan, nevertheless, this is something that is not to be taken at face value, for the reason that the United States remains stuck in Afghanistan, and without Pakistani help, it cannot hope to stabilize Afghanistan. Moreover, if there is military action against Pakistan by the United States, that could lead to a very major destabilization of South Asia. And furthermore, the need for the United States is considerably lessened with China now having become Pakistan's major ally through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So, the thinking within the military has been that, yes, we have to look at these positives and these negatives, and we have to find a way that navigates between the two carefully. One direction that this new navigation has taken is the mainstreaming of militant organizations. And this was noticed when the government of Nawaz Sharif was challenged by the sudden emergence of groups that hitherto had been unknown, the Milli Muslim League, which emerged from nowhere and yet managed to challenge Nawaz Sharif on his home turf and managed to win about 11% of the vote. So, to conclude this point, the army has not yet, I feel, made up its mind as to how it is going to respond to this external pressure that's being put upon it. And my feeling is that the the status quo is going to prevail, at least for a while. But now, let me come to the more, couple of minutes, oh, I was just getting to the point, but the question is, why does the army dominate? Okay, I'll cut it down to 2 minutes, which is they don't trust civilians. They think that civilians don't have the ability, they don't have the competence, they are not sufficiently dedicated to Pakistan, and that it is the army alone which is fit to govern Pakistan. So therefore, I think that the future is going to be more or less what it has been in the past. I feel that democracy in its previous form is likely to survive. It will not be totally against the will of the people. The fact is that the Pakistan army does enjoy the support of a substantial fraction of the population. Certainly not in Balochistan, but in Punjab, yes. If you asked whether the army should run the country or whether it should be the civilians, you will get, even in Punjab, that yes, the civilians should run the country, but then are the civilian politicians to be trusted? The answer will be no. Is the army to be trusted? Relatively more. So it's a complex issue which I wish I could have explored in more detail, but I think my time is up, and perhaps in the Q&A we could have a more substantive discussion on this. Thank you.
We're going to go straight on to Mara to ask her to flesh out a little bit of what was said there.
Right, okay, well I'll try and keep it brief. I'm going to focus mainly on Pakistan, but let me just tell you that I first went to Pakistan, I was living in India at the time from 2000. I first went to Pakistan from Delhi in 2003. And I think a lot of people forget nowadays that Pakistan was actually a lot richer than India back then. And that particularly struck me when I flew in from Delhi to Pakistan. That has changed enormously over the last sort of 10, 12 years. But I mean, a statistic that's worth reflecting on is that Indian GDP per capita only rose above that of Pakistan in 2009. It's remarkably recent. I happened, by the way, to be covering the Siachen War, which is fought between the Indian and the Pakistan military up in the mountains beyond Kashmir. And I can tell you, if you travel with the Pakistan army, you'll have hot running water, thick piled carpets, heating. If you travel with the Indian army, you're very lucky if you get a bucket of water to wash in. So it's very striking when you see them both operating. Otherwise, emotionally, actually, and as people, they're very, very similar. But the money is hugely different. So I then went on to do another book about, which is called Defeat as an Orphan, Why Pakistan Lost the Great South Asian War. And what I did was I looked at the evolving relationship between India and Pakistan since their nuclear tests in 1998. Now, in theory, you could argue that those nuclear tests created parity between India and Pakistan, and that they should have been starting again as equals. Pakistan no longer had any reason to feel insecure about an Indian invasion. But the reality is that what has happened is that India has actually used that time to emerge as a rising world power, and Pakistan has declined into not a failing state, because that's an exaggeration, but certainly a tottering state. And one of the things that comes across when you go back through that period is the extent to which Pakistan has been weakened by its absence of democracy. Now, I know we've not got much time, but I just want a couple of points I wanted to put into your minds when we think about democracy is why do we think democracy is a good idea? I mean, democracy is not like truth or God or something that's an absolute that we value. We value it because democracy is a convenient tool to make things work well. So it allows for the legitimacy of the state. It allows for the peaceful settlement of disputes. It creates domestic stability. And through that domestic stability, you get international strength. And if you look at those 4 criteria, you can see where India has thrived on that and Pakistan has been weakened. It's quite important to keep remembering this, that although the Pakistan army presents themselves, as indeed in Myanmar, as the guardians of the nation, they are not what keeps Pakistan stable. They are actually what makes Pakistan unstable, for a range of reasons, which I will try and list briefly without going into details. As Professor Hoodboy said, they dominate the country, they run foreign and security policy, they manipulate the democratic process, and they also dominate the economy, both in terms of taking more than a quarter of the budget directly, and also running these huge conglomerates, which I'm sure that Ayesha will speak about later. When you have this centralized, military-dominated economy, you have no means of for poor or lower middle-class people accessing more resources for themselves. So you're building in already a recipe for conflict. Some of those people will then turn to Islamist groups or various right-wing religious groups to try and expand their power and win access to resources. So, and I just keep repeating this point, the army is not giving you stability here, it is sucking up all the resources and creating instability from people who can't get access to opportunities any other way. There are various, for example, Pakistan, the army thinks it holds the country together, but the power of the military is such that it exaggerates the existing power of Punjab province, which dominates the country. You then get conflict from the smaller provinces, particularly Balochistan, which resents the domination both of the military and of Punjab. So again, this is not creating stability, it's creating instability. The other thing that you have to do if you are, and I think we saw this a little bit in Myanmar as well, is if you are insisting on having power, you need to find some means of legitimacy, and quite often you'll find artificial means of achieving legitimacy that will distort the way the country operates. So I'll just give one example from when Musharraf was in power. In 2002, Musharraf needed political allies at the national and provincial level to bolster up his own base. He sidelined the main political parties because they were most likely to attack him. And for example, in what was then Northwest Frontier Province, now known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, he installed, or helped to install, an alliance of pro-Taliban religious right groups who were running the most sensitive province in Pakistan, right next to Afghanistan, and they were running that from 2002 to 2007. Now, Musharraf might have done this for his own domestic reasons. The cynics say he did it deliberately to create a sympathetic environment for the Taliban and the Afghan Taliban and all the other groups fleeing Afghanistan following the US invasion in 2001. But whether through omission or commission, what he did was create a great deal of instability in that province that then allowed for an enabling environment for the rise of the Pakistani Taliban, for the takeover of Swat Valley, for example, by the Taliban, and indeed even, now I don't take a position on whether the Pakistan army leadership did or did not know that Osama bin Laden was living there, because I don't think we know what they knew. But what I would definitely say is if you have that enabling environment with a government that's sympathetic to the Taliban, it's going to be a lot easier for someone like bin Laden to find people that will help him hide and survive for so long in Pakistan. So again, through that need for legitimacy, Musharraf then created instability within his own country by promoting those sympathetic to militants who occasionally the Pakistan army were also trying to fight. Just skip through. Yeah, civilian politicians. yes, the civilian politicians are corrupt, or some of them are, not all. But one, we always talk about corruption among civilian politicians. We don't talk about corruption in the army, which is a much, much bigger role in the economy. But also, if you think about it from the perspective of civilian politicians, they never know how long they're going to be governing for, because you're always looking over your shoulder. You don't know when the next coup is going to be. You don't know what's going to happen. All this dominance of the army and the manipulation of civilian politics creates a perverse incentive for civilian politicians to be incredibly short-term. Some of them will make money while the sun shines. Quite a lot of them, as we have seen, will get their money out of the country, because you never quite know when you're going to have to escape into exile. So while all the focus is on the incompetence or corruption of civilian politicians, actually that is a product of a dominant military. It is not the other way around. It is not that the military has to step in to save Pakistan from its incompetent politicians. They are made that way by the dominance, political, security and economic, of the security establishment. It also weakens Pakistan internationally. I mean, first of all, I've made the point about how Pakistan is now trailing badly behind India, despite having set itself up to want to consider itself equal to India. It has also suffered appallingly from external alliances. It had a very unhappy relationship with the United States. It's now drifting into the China orbit. And I don't believe that in time that relationship with China will be any happier than the one with the United States, because ultimately these are foreign powers that are using Pakistan for their own interests. This is not about the benefit of the people of Pakistan. Okay, I'm going to come to a conclusion because I think we're nearly out of time, and I just want to make 2 points. One positive and one negative. Now, my positive point, I want to answer something that Humphrey said earlier about, we look at places like Syria and how truly appalling it is once you remove that, or you try to remove that autocratic power. And now, many years ago, I lived and worked in Syria, and I do think it is very, very different. It was always incredibly oppressive. I think what makes Pakistan different is it does have a very, very vibrant civil society. It does have political parties. It has, and I would urge all of you to follow it a bit more, recently Pashtuns from the tribal areas of Pakistan and a little bit from the settled areas of Pakistan, Pashtuns who have been tarnished as being Taliban, have actually started trying to hold protests, insisting, and these are peaceful protests, insisting on their rights according to the constitution. Well worth following, but to underline my point, there is a vibrant civil society that if you were to remove the power of the military in Pakistan, Pakistan will be fine, just as India has been fine without military dominance. It is capable of being stable without the army stepping in to take over. It's my positive thing. My negative, and again probably worth thinking about, so I end up with a balance, is that democracy is sadly going out of fashion worldwide. China is obviously increasing its influence on Pakistan, and I don't see it being so keen on promoting democracy. And so on one hand you can see these little green shoots growing within Pakistan from civil society. On the other, internationally, the outlook for Pakistan democracy, I would say, looks quite grim. There we go. Thank you.